started. And I'm not going to say his last name, Yuval. He's going to be starting off. Then we're going to go over to Paul, and both of them will be here for Q&A. So we can run through his side, then let Paul go, and then we'll take the Q&A at the end. All right? Take it away, Yuval.
Thank you very much. All right. Oops. Fast. Thank you for being here. I understand we're post-lunch, so I hope you're not yet taking naps. If you do, just try not, snore that much. I'm Yuval Shchori. I lead the product management team for ISE and additional products within the security policy and access portfolio. We'll talk about what is security policy and access in a second. Together with me, Paul Forbes, who is going to get on the stage in the second part of this session. First and foremost, a lot of times when we talk about security policy and access, comes the question, what does security policy and access? And you being our partners, I think it's important for you guys not only to understand, the details of what the screen does and what this, what the reaction to this button would be, but also to understand where do we come from. And what security policy and access is doing is actually connecting trusted users and trusted devices to trusted services. And today, with the explosion of devices, with the explosion of users requesting access, ubiquitously, I always remind myself, I used to be a CISO, probably late 90s, early 2000, and I'm just thinking what would have happened if someone would have stepped into my office and would like to connect. Back then it was probably the Palm Pilot or the iPacs to the network. Probably not the response that an IT manager or a security manager would provide today, right? Today would be, yes, please. And it's not that the attacks became easier or adversaries became less complex and less persistent. They're even more persistent, and we need to be able to identify these users, to identify these devices, and also to identify where they're trying to go and make sure that there is a policy. There's a security policy, by the way, not only security policy. Paul is going to talk about segmentation, and part of what we're trying to do with segmentation is make it relevant not only to security, to much more than just security. Okay, quality of service, policy-based routing, or performance routing, I think is the current name. But that's exactly what we're trying to do with this. How do we do this? Very strong capability of identifying, starting from active identity, going through passive identity, profiling of the devices, understanding where they are, et cetera, and then the apex is to also understand what is their security posture and level of threat and risk they're bringing to the network. And this is critical. It's not only about connecting someone to the network, but also understand that a security situation is something that is ever-changing, and we need to respond. Okay, so just as an example, is the ability to look into vulnerabilities and threat and say, oh my God, I allowed this user into the network, but I just found out she's using a laptop that has a vulnerability with the CVSS score of, I don't know, pick your minimum value that you would like to put in the network. It's higher than 7. If it's higher than 7, although she has authenticated correctly, she's using a compliant laptop, it's a corporate asset, but it has this, WannaCry or whatever, pick your sexy example to frighten your customers. This is something I don't want to see on my network. So then I'm going to change which trusted services this user can access. Okay, this is what we do. How do we do it? Maybe I should just, before going to how, just one thing. This is something that I hope that you already know. Maybe it doesn't look exactly like that in the UI, but the concept of a security matrix, a way to connect trusted sources and trusted destinations through a matrix and not through a very long security policy or an access list or a firewall policy. This is something that we're running with for ages. And again, Paul is going to talk about this even more. How do we do it? We've divided the team into 3 pillars. Access services is the pillar that I lead, and that's everything about getting someone onto the network, knowing who they are. Next thing, Mitz, who is also here, Mitz heads the Enterprise IoT pillar, and that's about all of our customers understanding that even if they're not in the IoT business, they better be ready for the flux of devices they're going to see on their network connected by people who might be great elevator engineers or great IPTV installers, but they do not know anything about security in a logical manner, nor IP addresses. Try this trick. Give the following IP address to someone who is an HVAC person, who's like a good one, 300.400.600.800. They'll take it. They can talk about elevator brakes. Okay? That's our problem. I met during Cisco Live Barcelona, I met with a very, representative of a very large company, and they actually make these sensors. And we talked about their IoT and OT segments. And their CIO told me, I do not want to know what's on that segment. And I was kind of surprised. What do you mean you don't want to know? He said, the minute I know, my management would expect me not only to tell them what's there, but also to set up a policy. And that's exactly, Paul is going to talk about how we get to this policy, et cetera. But we have to understand this is not only for manufacturing people. This is not only for healthcare vertical where they have, MRIs, et cetera. This is for each and every one of your customers, okay? Because they're going to have tons of devices installed by people who do not understand security nor networking. But I don't think that you would like to be the partner that would create a situation where the elevator stopped in between floor 2 and 3 because it was, it was the networking that broke it, right? We need to help our customers with that. Last but not least, almost what we're trying to get with understanding who's on the network and what's on the network is the ability to segment in a scalable way. VLANs are awesome. When it comes to 10,000 VLANs in an organization, followed by 10,000 segments of IP addresses, it's not working. And again, Paul is going to cover that in details to understand what does it mean. We're going to talk about this today. We're going to talk about some licensing changes. For who knows that ISE 2.4 is already out? Good, good. Just released 2 days ahead of schedule, which is something we usually, we're usually very proud of. It's a pride that lasts around 30 seconds, but still, I think it's an awesome thing that we managed to even, outnumber ourselves in terms of putting it at the right time and even beforehand. We'll talk about quality. For those of you who are here, I see some friendly faces here that I know. We talked about quality. We're going to continue talking about quality because I think it's, sometimes I feel in these sessions slightly like in an Alcoholic Anonymous session. Hello, my name is Yuval and I have a quality problem. This is where you should not laugh and say, we love you, Yuval. But we have to talk about this, and we want to make sure that we give you the, the platform and the tools to correctly position what your customers need to use. And as I said, Paul is going to cover policy analytics, segmentation, and how do we extend segmentation. You remember I talked about trusted services? We're no longer in Kansas, right? Toto, it's not only something in the data center, it's now something in the cloud. So we're going to talk about how do we extend these groups into the cloud. That's the wrong version of the deck, but I won't hold it against you, Ernst. Licensing changes. Who knows that we're changing the licensing structure? Good. I hear some murmuring. So, this has been slightly an ever-changing change. we worked with a lot of the we worked with a lot of the internal teams and also external teams to ensure that the message goes through correctly, and we actually got some pushback. And if there's something I am truly honored and proud to be, is the person that leads the team that actually said, hey, you know something, there's feedback coming, let's not push back on the feedback, let's listen, let's change. And we actually changed based on feedback coming from partners, coming from salespeople, coming from internal CSCs. We changed the message. Now, this is because ISE 2.4 is already out. It's the final message. We can't change it anymore. But again, I think for us, from a product management perspective, it's a moment of pride, really not just doing something, but doing something after we listen. And just so you know, it took 48 hours only to change the message. So we heard some feedback. It was strong enough to change the message internally, and in 48 hours, we came with a message and with a solution that kind of works. What is going to change? First, we move from block to node-based licensing. And at the end of the day, it's just going to make your bombs look nicer, simpler. No longer do you need to say, oh, I need for base license, I need 10,000 licenses and then one 2,500 and then one 500. What you're going to have, and it's 3 different SKUs, right? And it gets even more complex sometimes when you do it off of, you know, a DISTI GPL. Instead of that, you're going to have 1 SKU per license type, base plus Apex, the ones that are endpoint-based. Pardon? And you're going to just type a different quantity. So you need plus, there's going to be a SKU for plus, and you're going to put 12,673 licenses, and that's it. Same with Apex, same with base. Device admin, from a single, very low number due to penetration strategy that we use or tactics, we're converting it to a node-based license. So every node that requires T+ services to be provided would require a separate device admin license. Now is the time to say that when customers migrate from older releases, automatically their license, their single cluster license, the single, what we refer to as an ICE Cube license, is going to change to a 50 device admin node licenses, because 50 is the maximum amount of nodes you can have in a single ICE Cube. Okay, that's the idea. So from maintaining the value, we do not want to say, hey customer, you need to pay us more for something you already procured, right? Only new projects you would need to procure different, separate licenses for separate nodes. From a one-size virtual machine license, we're moving to one license that is going to be the virtual twin of the 3515 and the virtual twin of the 3595. Now, again, since you're partners, you're also going to see SKUs, and you're also going to see OVAs for what we refer to as super MNT internally, or an extra large VM, which is not going to add any additional endpoints currently, but instead is going to provide more performance on the MNT and PAN. So if you have tons of endpoints and it takes you 15 minutes to run a report, it's going to take you now 3 minutes or 4 minutes, or that's the ratio. Around 1 to 4, 1 to 3, that's around the ratio between the older reports that we used to run and the newer. And I think that eventually the reports are just kind of the facade of the performance benefits that you get from just a PAN or an MNT that you just throw in more horsepower into. And I'm going to talk about performance in a couple of slides. Instead of a right-to-use VM license, so you buy once and you use it 30 times because you feel like it, we're actually going to use license key VMs. We're not enforcing anything in 2.4. Okay, but we won't be enforcing in 2.4 anything, but eventually enforcement will commence, and then customers, surprisingly, would actually need to buy the amount of licenses they need in order to support their real amount of VMs they run. Okay, so if you have customers that bought a single VM or two and they have 30 VMs, that's the time to ask them to grab some budget to cover what they really use. Anything missing? Anything missing here for those of you who were here 6 months ago? All right, I don't think you guys were taking naps last time, but subscription is not here. We have decided, again, based on feedback, to hold for a couple of months the perpetual to subscription transition to give you guys more time to have discussions with your customers. Okay, so it's not going to be some kind of, you upgrade to 2.4 and then there's a problem, but instead we're moving forward with that. We're going to slow down a little bit. For example, one of the bits of feedback we received was it has to be on a major release. Why? Psychologically, customers do not expect these major changes to come in a minor release. Let's wait for a major release, right? So we got it. That's only one of the, one of the bits of feedback we received. Anticipate this in fiscal 19, all right? So probably before next August. Probably before August of 2019, you're gonna see this happening. Okay. Pardon? Can you discuss what with the customer? The transition to subscription?
Yes.
You can discuss it with the customer. It's future. It's not, okay? It's not happening now, okay? And again, I remind you that whatever we do, nothing is going to be enforced in 2.4, okay? Or nothing is enforced because 2.4 is already out. So I'll go run through some of the things we added. Again, I presented here last time the same set of slides, but I just want to refresh your memory. What we've added in 2.4 is the ability to do agentless posture in the visibility wizard only. And a lot of time people tell me, hey, why do you put something on the visibility wizard when you can't really use it in the real deployment? We're agile. And what we're, in Agile, whenever you're ready with something, you're trying to put it out to the market so the market can start consuming it and give us feedback, et cetera, et cetera. And when we're ready, we'll put it in the, full product. But from a sales perspective, from a sales pre-sales perspective, you walk into an account, you start the visibility wizard, you put the username and password of the administrator, the Windows Active Directory administrator. I'll explain in a second why. You just put which networks you want posture scanning to happen on, and that's it. Okay, and eventually what you're going to see whatever installed on the device, up to the process name, up to the process hashes, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and this is going to happen a la agentless, meaning that behind the scenes, that's exactly why we need the administrator password. We're going to use WMI to connect to each and every endpoint, install PSExec, and through PSExec kind of, do whatever we need to do in order to get the posture information on the endpoint. Okay, which is, something which is almost a common best practice in this area. You remember we talked about the paradigm shift where the users are now more powerful than IT people. We used to say, oh, you're not compliant, you're not on the network. This feature, which is which was requested by multiple customers, says you're not compliant. Okay, I'll give you an additional 5 to 10 minutes to repent. Okay, and then you could actually we can cache the last known good situation of your posture, and based on that we can say, oh, it looks like you were compliant when we just last checked you. But now you're not compliant, so I'm going to present you with this message that says you're not compliant, you're still in your grace period, but if these amount of minutes that you've set here already passed, you're going to see this message, which is, sorry, we gave you some time, you didn't comply, now you're out and you need to rescan in order to continue your business in the network, okay? We talked about IoT, we talked about the understanding of the fact that we have to know what's happening there. It can't be this black box. The problem is, or the challenge is, in a lot of the situations, there are so many vendors. It's hard to understand what's there. Thankfully, being part of Cisco, we have another product which is called IND, Industrial Network Director. And the fact that it's industrial, it's not only for industrial networks. We actually have some good use cases where customers use it for for building management systems, the HVAC, the elevators, etc. Now, the IND knows exactly what's happening here from an asset perspective. It knows exactly what's sitting on which port. What we did in ISE 2.4, we actually worked with the IND guys, so they published this information into PXGrid, and now we know exactly what's on the network. We can pass this information, for example, to StealthWatch, just like we do, with any other deployment. And now StealthWatch can analyze it, but we can also provide visibility to the administrator what is connected here, and what does this MAC address mean, and what does this IP address mean. Okay, and if we want, we can actually deploy policy based on that. Okay, so yet another way to profile. Instead of us actively profiling, we're actually using a source of information to understand what's on this black box network. So if you have customers using IND, if they have ISE, now's the time to talk about integration. If they do not have ISE, now is a great time to start a sales cycle, okay, because it's already something that you have there. And vice versa, if they have ISE and you want to go and start an IND sales cycle, that's exactly a great talking point. Like, you already have visibility in your enterprise segments. Now let's see, how do we extend it to your IOE, IoT, OT, whatever they have in the network. IP version 6. We started our IP version 6 actually with TACX in 2.3, where we added IP version 6 support for TACX. Radius came with IP version, with ISE version 2.4. Hopefully in the next release, we're going to cover the rest of IP version 6, so we're going to provide IP version 6 compliance within ISE. It's going to cover probably 95% of the use cases that are possible, and it's going to be 100% of what our customers need, right? Just like, if you remember migration from ACS to ISE, we decided that we're not going to support Leap proxy in ISE, because this is something that died years ago. Okay, so we're going to do exactly the same thing here. We've added SGT support, so you can now map SGTs to IP version 6 addresses, together with the fact that we've increased, I have a slide on that, we increased the scale of SGT mapping to 10,000. I think it makes a big thing now that you could actually use it with customers that need IP version 6 and or need IP version 4, IP version 6 mapping for very large deployments, again, up to 10,000 SGTs. One additional thing we've added here is selective deployment. Because now you have 10,000 SGT mappings, it doesn't mean that the poor, 3850 at, this deserted branch needs to know the entirety of these 10,000 mapping, right? We can say, oh, all I care for is just, let's say it's a shop, it's a store. All they need to know is where is their Active Directory, where is, from a security perspective, their PCI, cash register server, et cetera, and that's it. Okay, that's the idea behind selective deployment. Validating trusted config. One thing that we have to remember is the fact that unlike a policy installation in a firewall, where you push, when you deploy the policy, and you actually wait until the policy is deployed, and then you say thumbs up, everything's okay. Because TrustSec was designed to be very scalable, we did something completely asynchronous. And what happens is that ISE sends a message to all of the network access devices and says, I have some new configuration from you, come and get it. And it is the responsibility of the network access device to spend the resources and to find the right time to reach out back to ISE and say, yep, give me version number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The problem with that, because it's asynchronous, that unlike in a firewall dashboard that I can tell you, all these firewalls have the latest policy, I couldn't tell if someone really pulled it or not. And if it pulled it, did it drop the update because something didn't work out? So what we're actually doing, and you can configure it, you can run it either manually or configure it to happen automatically after each deployment of the policy, to actually go to each NAD and say, tell me your latest version, tell me your latest version, tell me your latest version, and then understand exactly what configuration running on the on the switch or the wireless controller or what have you. And I think that Paul is going to talk about a completely different way we're doing it in a different area. For follow improvement, we've added 500 profiles during the time of 2.4, and actually customers got it automatically. They didn't need to wait for 2.4. Today, we also marked a milestone of 1,000 IoT signatures on the communities. Okay, so if you don't use the communities for signatures, you can also get signatures for this specific device that's not in the ISE database and your customer runs and they need it. We've updated around 200 profiles. We're doing a lot of effort around profiling to make sure that it's concise, and we help you on the journey from unknown to known, from a what's happening on the network. Quality, my favorite subject, whether I like it or not. As you probably saw, again, for those of you who know our presentations, we try to pack every release with tons of functionality. With 2.3, 2.4, we actually took a step back and we said we're going to fix quality. The reason is very simple. We have a lot of customers hitting defects, taking their networks down. We had a lot of escalations, a lot of tag cases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We were starting to be kind of, squashed by our own weight. And we decided to make a stop to it and insert into the product just the functionality that we have to, and all the other resources actually went to fixing quality. We did this in two parallel routes. One is, let's analyze all the CFDs, the customer found defects we have, see what are the ones that are, more customers are hitting, and let's fix it in the order of the bugs that make the largest or the biggest impact. Okay. We also got into a patching cadence on steroids where we actually released a patch every month. Okay. And again, this is not funny, kids. This is to make sure that if a customer hits a bug, we can fix it not in a hot patch, in a formal patch, as soon as we can. We also did something that, for me, it was a surprise that we don't have, but we did not have patch parity. So, if something was fixed in 2.2, a customer hits a bug on 2.2, we're fixing this bug because they found it on 2.2 and they need a resolution now, right? I assume that you understand, and I hope that you are thankful for us not rewriting the code every time. So actually, when we have 2.2, it means that we had something in 2.2 that came from 2.1. Now, if the bug was actually in a 2.1 code, we didn't fix it on 2.1. We fixed it on 2.2 because this is where the customer hit it. What we're now doing is actually creating patch and fix parity, meaning that every time we fix something on a specific release, we're going to backport it and future port it to everything, so we know that a bug is fixed across our entire family of releases. So that's one route. The other route is actually looking at the architecture of the product, finding the areas where we see most bugs, and hardening these areas. Hardening not from a security perspective, but from an architecture framework perspective. I think that a great example is the Active Directory code, which works flawlessly when the domain controller actually acts as we expect it to act. Unfortunately, sometimes it misbehaves. It provides slightly different answer, and we didn't respond well, so we've created, we've put the checks and balances within the product to ensure that we do not impact the network, okay? So I think that that's generally what we did. Just so you know, ISE 2.2, latest patch, probably plus 3 weeks. So, I usually like when people ask me, when do I install the patch? Wait a couple of weeks, wait 2-3 weeks to make sure it soaks. Someone else, enjoys a feature. But then this is what you need to go with. Remember, patches are for fixes, releases are for features. I just had a very interesting discussion with a CSC earlier this morning, and he has a customer that wants to go to ISE 2.3. Why? Because they think that in ISE 2.3 there's a fix to their problem. There is a CFD listed. It does not say it's fixed in 2.3, but the customer kind of, which is strange. Usually it's not the customer that's being, pushing to go to newer releases. Very simple. Our golden release today is ISE 2.2 with the latest patch. This is where you want your customers to be at, okay? ISE 2.3 is only if they have SDA deployments or they're planning on SDA deployments, because this is where you have the capability to integrate with DNA Center. If they do not have these requirements, they should stay with ISE 2.2. I hope you do not have customers on 1X. If you do, 2.2 patch 7 would be the right route. And what we're going to do is actually we're going to let 2.4 soak. We're going to review its metrics. We're actually going to also send a pulse survey to some of the partners to get some baseline around ISE 2.2 current patch. And then we're going to do the same survey when we think we're ready to mark 2.4 as the golden release. And only after we see the lagging indicators and the leading indicators to say, yes, that's the right thing to do, and it seems that the stars are aligning well, let's announce 2.4 as the golden release. Okay? A question around upgrades. Who knows what URT is? Okay, you just failed the test. Not the guys that raised their hands. You just maximize it, right? It's A++. URT is, no, it's not user registration tool. It just shows how veteran you are. There's someone told me you're a veteran. He just called me old the other day. But URT is upgrade readiness tool. Was released together with 2.3. It works on every 2X release. What it does, it doesn't fix anything. What it does is you run it on the secondary pan. It doesn't impact the network. You run it on the secondary pan. It simulates an upgrade. Now, what is the most frustrating thing in an upgrade? To find out, in 97% that it failed because of the database scheme being, not working well. So that's exactly, it's not going to fix anything, but it's going to tell you need to contact the TAC or not, right, for a problem. So that's it with regards to it. I urge you, before every upgrade from 2X to something else 2X or whatever, use the URT on the secondary pan. I've left some, I'm not going to go through it, I've left some additional resources here. I hope that you know CS.co, Selling ISE, and CS.co, all those links that provide you with exactly what you need to sell and support ISE. There's also a great always-on demo. I think it's second in Cisco with regards to how people use it, the amount of users that use it, and this is it.
All right, good afternoon, folks. I'm going to go over segmentation policy and what we've been doing over the last 9 months in terms of delivering the value around segmentation. So first, I just want to start with the perspective we bring, not necessarily to the technology per se, but what it means for a customer to adopt. So to begin with, segmentation has to start with a stable platform. And so what you've seen from us most recently is this enormous emphasis, at least I hope you've seen and heard, an emphasis on automation of what we call the fabric of network infrastructure, security infrastructure, deploying things from a software-defined networking model. And so if you're going to deploy services in a consistent way, in a scalable way, we need to have the infrastructure ready, and we need to have it automated so that as new infrastructure is added, as infrastructure is moved and changed, there's the proper foundation and there's some neat decoupling from the services and the policy that you want to enact. Now, Cisco has had over a decade of working on policy definition around segmentation and, as we noted earlier, around the identification and classification of users and things. Hence the strategy of trusted users and trusted devices communicating to trusted services. We've been improving those year by year, release by release, but there have been some things that we've noted are missing. So again, hopefully you've heard from us quite a bit around things like assurance. There's user 360, device 360, but what I'm going to talk to you about today is some of the policy assurance aspects. Some of the things that you'll see in DNA Center, for example, are like wireless assurance, right? So how do we know that the wireless spectrum is working properly? And then the other one that's kind of interesting, and frankly, many of you who have supported us on the journey and our customers on the journey towards segmentation have been kind of the key ambassadors for us to understand that there was a gap between classifying the things on the network and building a segmentation policy. There was an opportunity to accelerate the time to value for the customer and frankly take a lot of manual repetitive effort out of your hands and move you to frankly more profitable areas. And then finally the last piece is moving what hopefully again some of you have heard of, rapid threat containment, into DNA Center so that as customers begin to migrate to the fabric, the same kind of ecosystem and third-party intelligence can be enacted in the fabric of the network. So stepping back for a moment just to level set, how do we approach segmentation, security segmentation? Well, traditionally, of course, for multiple decades, we've been using a topology-dependent, network-centric model of enforcing traffic, okay? So that's your traditional VLANs, your IP-ACLs, and it's very, very tightly coupled to the underlying topology of the network, the way traffic is forwarded, and it's also incredibly inflexible, right? Because every single time you want to deploy a new segment, not only are you adjusting ACLs, which has an impact on the environment, it has certain operational considerations, tickets, change control windows, and so forth. But it also means that we, in many cases, have to reformulate the addressing of the environment. So over 10 years ago, we started down this journey to deploy TrustSec. And so with what used to be called security group tags, now called scalable group tags, we have now been able to automate the membership of groups, that is to say the way the topology describes a user and a device or a workload as an IP address. And we've been able to decouple that from how you and our customers describe those things, right? We're going to automate those and keep them very loosely coupled so that when you want to deploy policy, you can do it flexibly at scale across the network without having to re-engineer the network infrastructure and the security infrastructure. And so every time that you want to generate a new group, when you want to generate a new workload, expand a workload, move a workload, deliver a new segment, it's not tied to infrastructure change. Okay. So the emphasis on this has been to try and bring together the identity services engine that has housed all of the services of authentication, authorization, automated grouping. The most obvious group is I get an authentication request, I match it to an Active Directory group, I get a group identity back, I deliver that as an authorization. But over the years, right, we've chained together all these new kinds of attributes, all these kinds of new conditions. The type of device, whether the device is managed, where the user is, where the device is, and then most recently, as you've all noted, being able to have really that principle of continuous assessment, being able to take in information in near real time to generate net new authorizations. So all of that is done within the Identity Services Engine. At the same time, we have this software-defined network strategy being led by the controller, DNA Center. And so we've kept authentication and authorization within the Identity Services Engine, and all of those services I spoke to earlier, guest, BYOD, profiling, compliance, or posture. But we've started to build a new segmentation policy experience within DNA Center, okay? And so then we use APIs to synchronize critical pieces of information between Identity Services Engine and DNA Center to ease the workflow of you and the customers as they operate these two policy engines. So why did we take this opportunity? Well, first and foremost, we thought there was a really significant opportunity with the new controller platform, DNA Center, to re-engineer the user experience around segmentation. And I'll show you a few of the screenshots that are coming from that effort. The second thing is that the platform itself was able to ingest new forms of telemetry, new forms of information. And so by taking that information in, we were able to give, again, you and our customer a level of intelligence about segmentation policy operation that hitherto we were not able to. And then finally, the platform itself, being a controller, needed to be open to third-party integration. And so that third-party integration was obviously a kind of critical trajectory for the entire industry, and obviously we endorsed that openness as well. Now, I mentioned before that there was this missing step in the life cycle that I started the conversation with. And that missing step really has to do with analytics, policy analytics. When I sat down with a large software company a couple weeks ago to go over their segmentation needs, they had been the unfortunate beneficiary of an external audit. And so that audit told them that their wired environment was effectively unsecured, or insecure, excuse me, and that they needed to start delivering some amount of risk management to their wired network. And so, they brought us in, we started talking about it, and I said, well, what do you want to start with? What do you want to begin to get your hands around this particular problem? And they said, well, let's start with something simple. I said, okay, what do you think is simple? I was waiting for the humorous laugh. And so they said, well, let's start with print services. I know where all my printers are. A little bit of chuckles, okay. I know where all my print services are. And I said, okay, do you know how your printers talk to your print services? They go, of course I do. I say, is there any chance, I just let that rest for 3 or 4 seconds. I said, is there any chance that any of your software development people know how to spool print jobs directly to the printers? Oh, yeah, they probably do. Okay. So I said, let's step back for a moment and let's talk about really discovering your environment properly so that as you move towards delivering these segments, you don't break business services. And so that is the function of a service that we're developing called Segmentation Policy Analytics. It's meant to discover the environment, offer a picture, a navigable picture of the way in which different groups communicate one to another, and then over time model those particular services, in effect locking a soft version of the intended policy and then watching the behavior of how those groups communicate with one another, and then alerting the operator, the architect, the policy administrator that there's indeed been a change. And then at that point, once that soft model of the intended policy has been trustworthy, again, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, there might be end of month or end of quarter kind of circumstances that need to be verified. We can then recommend that policy and push it into ISE or DNA Center. Okay? So how are we beginning with this? Again, our goal right now, tentatively, is to try and deliver a set of this functionality in the DNA Center 1.3 release in July. If we don't make that window, we are looking at working with a set of you folks to help equip you to drive this kind of segmentation analytics and intelligence earlier than the FCS release that we would give to customers. But where we're beginning is basically talking to StealthWatch, which StealthWatch is the best tool we have for scalably aggregating the activity of users and things on a network, okay? And then couple that information with the Identity Services Engine, which is the best tool we have for identifying and classifying the users and devices. If I bring both of those pictures together, I can show a picture of how a segmentation policy could eventually work, okay? Now, I'm going to try and emphasize this point. When DNA Center 1.3 is released this summer, the effort that we've spent in building this new segmentation policy experience is a package that gets downloaded called the Access Control Application. Again, we could reduce it to 3 letters, so we were feeling very confident that we had indeed made a Cisco technology. So when you actually log into DNA Center, you're going to see it show up as a new group-based access control service. Now, as I mentioned earlier, and you've all mentioned as well, group-based access control, the segmentation policy that is being built here, has to work and interoperate with the authentication and authorization services that exist inside the customer. Now, obviously, we strongly prefer the use of the Identity Services Engine for this function. There are some very notable advantages to having Identity Services Engine in the customer's environment. Notably, because DNA Center is the source of authority for the scalable group tags and the scalable group ACLs, in other words, the segmentation policy, we need to be able to synchronize those policy objects with the Identity Services Engine so that when a user or a device or even a workload gets authorized onto the network, that SGT is available as part of the authorization profile. In a couple slides, I'll show you we interoperate with third-party systems like a ClearPass or a Forescout or a Genian, but they don't have that level of synchronization. And therefore, there's a level of manual work that has to be conducted to stitch those two policy systems together because they're effectively working as ships in the night at the application level. So we've tried to streamline the interoperability of our products. Another important aspect of ISE working with DNA Center is all of the assurance capabilities that come with ISE, most notably the one I referred to earlier, the segmentation policy analytics, really have to work with ISE profiling and authentication. And so in any form of assurance, there's a great deal more value that is created when we have ISE working with DNA Center. So go through this very briefly so you're aware of it. Again, the point I made about being open is a major emphasis for us. And so with DNA Center, we have created an architecture where existing AAA services, FreeRadius, ClearPass, can work with DNA Center so that the authentication and authorization occurs the way it does normally today, and a segmentation policy can then result from that authentication and authorization, and the two are sort of neatly decoupled from one another. And that information effectively flows through the fabric. The network devices are intelligent enough to take the information from an authorization from, say, a ClearPass and relay that back up to DNA Center, for then DNA Center to send back a segmentation policy decision. In the case of a passive NAC system, say like a Forescout, or in the future a Genian, or maybe a Impulse Packet Sense, choose your vendor, there are a set of APIs that we built, RESTful APIs, east-west in that classic application sense, so that DNA Center can be programmed by the passive NAC system, and DNA Center, being the controller of the network, can then push that policy southbound into the network for the segmentation policy that's needed. It's important to note that, with all of these fabric approaches, a lot of these passive systems will have to go away, because effectively they've always been sessioning in to each and every network element and changing the static configuration. That's no bueno, as they say, when it comes to controller-led architectures. So here are just some screenshots I wanted to share with you of the work that's underway for group-based access control. I think it's important to note that this is a list or a table view, but what's interesting, and again, this was the opportunity I mentioned earlier for us moving to the new DNA Center platform, is now we're able to transpose the policy information, the scalable group, with where it's been downloaded and what it's been doing over time. So now, as a policy operator, you get one consistent view of what the policy is, where it is, and as I said, how it's functioning. This is the matrix view, if some of you are familiar with it from the TrustSec Work Center in ISE. We're also calling this a policy set, so when you see that terminology in DNA Center, you'll be familiar with it, I hope. And this is a significantly more responsive and interactive form of the matrix itself. So as you start to get your POVs and you start to work with some of the labs this week, I certainly look forward to your feedback on this, but we're very excited about the interactivity that is provided by this new capability. Another thing is, you've all mentioned that we replicated in ISE for customers who are using ISE today for TrustSec. This is a slightly different take on the same thing, in that there's a verification that happens when a policy is pushed. And so now it'll be a real-time indication to the operator about where the policy has been downloaded, whether it's taken effect, and where it hasn't, why it hasn't. So you can take immediate action on it. One of the historical problems, of course, has been I downloaded the policy, I come back the next day, there are some trouble tickets, I don't know why things are failing, was it one change or was it the other? So we're going to fix that. And then, of course, metrics over time. How are the policies actually working? So this is kind of the audit level view if you have stakeholders who need to understand, okay, you said you've mitigated risk in my environment for this particular set of clinical services or this particular set of PCI concerns, what have you. This is a way of saying, okay, we deployed the policy, this is how active it's been, and this is where it's been taking place. Now, just in closing, the notion of segmentation has expanded over the last few years, right? 10 years ago, we were really talking about branch, campus, and data center segmentation. But that's not really the case anymore. We have customers who are deploying workloads all over the place. Private infrastructure, whether that's a traditional data center or a virtual data center, in the case of either a colo or, say, VMware NSX, or a public infrastructure, Amazon, Microsoft Azure, GCP in the case of Google. So the opportunity is really interesting to us to be able to normalize the policy groups across these different domains. So we led the way, I'm proud to say, over 10 years ago with a set of very, very industrious, bright people to build these kind of group objects that would decouple the security policy from the infrastructure. And, interestingly, this really started to take off in the data center space. Sometimes you'll see this in Amazon as a security group, or in Microsoft Azure as a network security group, because, of course, they could never call them the same thing. In Google, security group, I think in NSX, I think they're also called security groups, but they're all now picking up this notion of being able to identify the service irrespective of what its IP address is. And so there's a really novel and powerful opportunity to dramatically streamline the operations of customers as they start having this sort of hybrid enterprise, right, where workloads are bursting into different environments and customers are arbitraging different cost models from private to public and from public cloud to other public cloud. So we are delivering in July the cloud policy platform, which will actually normalize this group-based policy across these different domains. So in the case of the branch and campus, we have ISE and DNA Center. In the case of Cisco private data centers, in a sense, you have ACI. In the public data center space, we're going to be delivering the Amazon Web Services support. We're already working on VMware NSX and Microsoft Azure. Certainly, if there are other domains that you come across, we're eager to hear about them. And again, this is a screenshot of the work under development that is mapping the various attributes from different cloud environments into specific scalable groups, and then the mappings, the actual IP mappings underneath them to facilitate that all of the infrastructure actually understands how to enforce traffic as the groups and the services move around. Thank you. Questions?